So today's session is 5 tips for an easier literature review. My name is Katie Hoskins. I'm a librarian at California Health Sciences University. This workshop is part of the Scholarly Snippets series. We designed this to be short, quick, to the point, to help you advance your research skills and support your scholarly activities. Most of us are at colleges of osteopathic medicine with smaller schools and just trying to really help our students, faculty, and staff. For this particular session, the goal is for you to learn some tips for an easier literature review. So let's go ahead and get started. First, a bit of shameless self-promotion here because I am a librarian, but seriously, a librarian is going to be a big help for you. A librarian can help you identify which databases to search because there are so many out there. Sometimes knowing the right tool to search can be tricky. PubMed is a great tool and often the first line, but we want to look at some other resources too. Librarians can help you to identify additional search terms that you may not have thought about. And this is usually a bit of a conversation because we're going to rely on you for your expertise in your subject field and then our expertise in knowing the resources and how to search them. That also lends itself to us helping you to formulate search strategies for different databases because they're not all the same. They work differently behind the scenes, and so you have to adjust your search strategy for each one to get effective search results. So, and if you end up doing a systematic review, a lot of these pieces are part of that, but whether you want to write an article or prepare something for teaching, we can help you with all of those things. The second tip is to search the literature before writing. Check this funny meme from Gru with Minions. I have this amazing idea. I'm going to pour my heart and soul into it. I'm ready to show it to the world. Oh, someone already did that. We don't want to do it and get into things and realize, well, this isn't going to work. This has already been written about. It's redundant. So that's why really we want to start with our literature search before starting to write or really work on our projects. Because in the end, this is going to save you time in the long run, even though research is an iterative process where we do a little bit, we start working, we do a little bit more research. Ultimately, it's going to save you time versus writing everything and then going back and trying to find sources. It's also going to give you a stronger project, in part because you're not looking for sources that just confirm what you suspect, your hypothesis, you're going into it with an open mind. But by doing the literature search, you're going to be able to help situate the context for your study. How does what you're doing fit in with this larger body of what everybody else has done? It's going to help to inform your research design and your methodology. Well, this other study did this, and that didn't really work. Or this study did this, and it did work. Or, okay, maybe I can modify things. All of those are really useful pieces by doing the literature search. The literature search is also going to help give you a stronger project by identifying areas that will help you to advance the body of knowledge. So where are some of those gaps? The third thing that I mentioned here is the project blueprint. By doing your literature search, it's going to give you an idea of where you want to go with your project. So part of what we're going to suggest here for searching the literature, there's a recommendation here from Lingard, L. Lingard, and she suggests the problem gap hook method for your introduction and literature review sections. So what is this? Well, it's identifying a problem, and that's where your literature search is really going to help you with finding out these different things that we already know about an existing problem. From there, a gap in the current knowledge or thinking about the problem is going to start to emerge. Those two things are going to lead you to your hook. What is going to convince readers that this gap matters and what you're doing is going to help to bridge that gap? So here's a specific example. So this problem, and this is from her article, has to do with poor team communication and all of the things that we know that team training can be effective, some of the changes that have happened. And then as you start to look and you're reading, we can see the gap. Well, we know all this stuff about poor team communication, but we really don't know much about how teamwork training principles would apply in distributed teams. Okay, so now we create our hook So given that healthcare teamwork is distributed rather than co-located, and that should be much of it, our curricula will be lacking until we can meet that gap, essentially. So we start on the left with all of our facts. What did we learn from our literature search? We'll start to see a gap emerge, and that leads us to a hook. And this may impact some of the notes that you take as you are looking at different articles. The third tip is to use a citation manager during the search process. I don't know about you, but I remember being in college and rifling through a bunch of papers, trying to find the source that I used. It was really stressful and frustrating too, trying to find the source that I had used. And it's not fun. So I've learned to save as I go. So I know a lot of times I've saved things on a share drive or the documents in your computer, however you want to do that. Recently, I've begun to use SciWheel, which is a reference manager, because it allows me to highlight, annotate, make notes, as well as when I need to cite it to do it there. So that's one of, I think, a suggestion that will make your life a lot easier. It's just save as you go. The fourth suggestion is to use what's called an evidence analysis log, although it has other names. So the one that you see here is a basic one that I've shared with our students at the College of Osteopathic Medicine at CHSU. And I modified this one from a spreadsheet provided by Hirsch Health Sciences Library. So even though these columns are here, reference, sample, purpose, methodology, you can customize those to whatever you would like. This type of document is going to make it easy to quickly review and compare the different resources that you found. So especially if you did have the methodology column or whatever kind of columns that you would like and that are helpful for you. And this is where also too, that problem gap hook method that was outlined by Lingard is going to come into play, because whether you have a notes column or something specifically, whether you want to say, well, problem, and then you'll start to see the gap and kind of create your hook. The last suggestion, which might seem really kind of obvious, is to appropriately cite your resources. I wanted to share, there was a systematic review and meta-analysis published about quotation accuracy in medical journal articles. And even if their estimates are wrong, it still is a really important issue. But what they found were for errors, which they looked at as the correctness of the content, not just whether you could go and find the source, which doesn't always happen either. They were looking for major errors and minor errors. Major errors, they defined as those that completely don't match what the original authors said or did. Minor errors were maybe a little inconsistent or factual, but they didn't fundamentally alter the meaning of the original source. So we're looking at 10 to 12% for those major and minor errors, and then overall combined about 22 to 26%. That's really kind of important when we're talking about medical literature. I mean, we should care about accurate literature no matter what field we're in, but this could impact patient care and well-being. So it's really important to care about those types of things and to get it right. So what are some ways that we can make it easier to appropriately cite our resources? Well, here's this funny thing about when you cite a paper that cited paper. So the original message gets distorted. And we really don't want to cite secondary sources, which is you haven't read it yourself. It's my colleague Kyle wrote X, and I'm going to cite his paper rather than going to read it myself. I think I might have actually said it. If Kyle cited somebody else's paper and I cited only Kyle instead of that other paper, that is a secondary citation. Apologize for getting that one wrong there. But that's not good because the message gets distorted. Another thing is to check and see if your article was retracted. So especially if you're saving as you go, when it comes time, especially if you're doing something longer like a systematic review or just trying to publish a paper, it is good to go back and see that all the articles have not been retracted yet. PubMed is usually pretty good about this. As you can see from this example here, they made it very clear at the top that this article was retracted and linked to the retraction notice. Not always, depending upon your source, so clear, but at least it is here. I'd also like to share that NLM also does this for some errata documents, so where authors go, ooh, we made a mistake, but here's the corrections. NLM also makes it clear that they don't differentiate between articles that were retracted because of honest error and those that were because scientific misconduct or plagiarism occurred. It's just this was retracted. Another thing, and this also goes back to some other work that Lingard wrote about when we're talking about appropriately citing your sources, is to think about the verbs, or actually all your statements and how you use. I'll give you a moment to read these 3 sentences and think about what are the differences here. Anybody have any observations that they'd want to share in the chat or verbally? If you had to guess, so if there's describes, discovered, claims. So thank you, Laura. Claims, they have data support to support. So do any of these terms seem positive, neutral, or I should say affiliating or distancing? So Molly said described seems more observational, discovered seems like an intervention. Thank you. Yes, so those are great observations. So we're not always going to think about these subtleties, whether we're writing or we're reading, but they are subconscious impressions that our brain gets as we read. So describes, that's a little bit more what I would say neutral. Okay, they did this and they're describing it. Discovered is a lot more positive. Oh, wow, they did this. Like Molly said, a bit of an intervention. Claims, that one can be neutral. It can also be distancing, which is what Lingard describes as distancing, that it's a little bit skeptical. Did they actually do this or not? Is this true? But it could be, like Laura was saying, that they have some data to support it. So it could be legitimate, not legitimate, neutral. So these are some different verbs that she shares. I don't know about you all, but when I am writing, sometimes I want to make sure I'm not using the same verb again and again and again. So sometimes I do consult with the thesaurus. So I found it really helpful that Lingard included these tables where she specified, well, these are some different verbs that are neutral versus affiliating versus distancing. So to think about the verbs that you are choosing when you write your sentences for your literature review. And it's a general guide because everything, of course, depends on context. And you'll notice that suggests is an italices at the bottom of the neutral and the distancing column because it can be either or depending on the context. So the last thing here that Lingard also provides are some verbs that can kind of clarify what an author did, said, or their opinion. And for the said and opinion, she differentiates between weaker and stronger. So what an author did, they analyzed it, they assessed, they concluded or demonstrated. Things that they said, well, they described it, they affirmed it, explained. For an opinion, well, they suggest, they speculate, argue, there's claim again. So just the main point is to think about how does your reference, not only making sure somebody can get back to it, that it hasn't been retracted, but that it accurately conveys what the author or authors did or wrote in their study. Before I go on to questions, I just want to say that we'll have a link here for the survey. Our next workshop is on REDCap, and that's on January 24th that you can sign up for. I know this was a really quick kind of introduction and some 5 tips. And so I just want to say that if you have any questions, I will do my best to answer them. Okay, I do see someone commented about the product that SciWheel, that's the reference manager. And they do have a free version as well as a premium.
I do have a question. This is Molly.
Hi, Molly.
Hi, I have a question for you or for anyone maybe on the call, is that I have a lot more of our students who are really interested in um, doing lit reviews and getting those published. Do you have, like, what kind of advice do you provide for them? Because I'm not sure how publishable a lot of lit reviews are, especially if they're not like a systematic review or scoping review. They're more like your narrative review style. So I've got medical students that want to do these, but I don't know how, and they usually want to do this to make their resume or their CV look better for residency. And I'm just like, I don't know how much traction or how much they're actually going to be able to publish those. So I don't know if anyone has experience. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I definitely welcome anybody to chime in here. I'm new to health sciences librarianship. So I don't know. I would agree with you, Molly, that I don't see a lot of necessarily narrative reviews being written, that it would be more part of a project in a larger paper or study. But anybody else want to chime in? Okay, well, I guess food for thought. Yes, Michelle, I agree. Wish we had an answer too. Any other questions at this time?
Well, I would just say, hi, this is Kimberly.
Hi, Kimberly.
I'm Chief of Education and Research at East Coast VA. And before that, I was in the university as a full professor. And I find as a whole, getting literature reviews published is not that easy in today's scholarship venue, because folks are looking for other things, gap analyses, systematic reviews, all of those kind of things that have more rigor. But sometimes you can get a literature review, which I tell students is more like writing a book report. You can get that published in more clinically based journals, some of the trade journals, really, what I would call a trade journal, and not, I don't want to say that they're non-scholarly, but it's not the same. It's not the same level of rigor and such. So I do think it's like, okay, let me think of something. Okay, it would be, my field, my background is in nursing. So I would say it would be like getting something published in RN versus having it published in the Journal of Association of Nurses in Aged Care, which is likes database articles, or Nursing Outlook. It's not going to publish something that you would publish in RN. So for any kind of students, whatever their discipline, there usually are some trade journals that if they had a literature review, a book report, they could perhaps, especially if it's a timely subject, they probably could get it published there.
Thank you for sharing it, Kimberly. That's very helpful. Someone shared in the chat as well that they've had a few medical students get narrative reviews published one was in the journal Children. And she suggested looking for journals that list narrative reviews in their scope. Thank you. Okay, can I discuss Lingard's work a bit more? Do they have any additional resources beside those 2 articles? I think there were 3 articles. Laura, if you'd like, I'll make a note and I'll send you the link to them. It definitely seems that it's an interest of the author to be able to really get people to do a good literature review and to be able to more accurately convey what has been written. So I'm not an expert on her work, so I want to make sure I don't misrepresent it. But I shared it with our students this year, our medical students, because I thought it was really helpful to think about that, because we also talked a little bit about biased words that could be also misleading or just hurtful. So we talk about medication adherence versus compliance and how those subtle differences can make a difference. So that's kind of where some of this also went along. Thank you. Thanks to everybody that did come. I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes if there are any additional questions or anything anybody wants to discuss.